Hey everybody, today we're going to be looking at the cell membrane and trying to figure out all the parts of the cell membrane and what they do. Yep, there it is, cell membrane. Now that's kind of an artist's conception of it, so we're going to look at those parts a little bit more closely. If you wanted to see what it looked like in real life, maybe through an electron microscope or something like that, and that's more what it would look like. Now we start looking at these actual parts. We're going to focus first on these little things that look like gray balloons with two strings hanging down from them. Over here they're marked phospholipids. Let's look at a closer look at these. Okay, here's a cleaned up version of the membrane with all those other things kind of left off and just looking at the phospholipids. Now they're arranged in what's called a bilayer, almost like a lipid sandwich. And what looks like little balloons here, right, actually look more like this in real life. They've got the head end of the balloon, that little kind of round end, is made up of something called choline, phosphate, and glycerol. Now you don't have to worry about those structures, but what is kind of cool about those is that they are what are referred to as hydrophilic, meaning they're water loving. They actually arrange themselves so that that end will be facing into water. The other end, what looks like two little strings hanging down from the balloon, those are two chains of fatty acids. And the lipid layer, these fatty acid layers, are hydrophobic. They tend to not like to be in water or arranged in water, so if you have this phospholipid bilayer, you eventually end up with this lipid sandwich where that choline phosphate end is facing towards the liquid and the fatty acid end is going to be facing away from it. This is going to allow the cell to actually contain fluids, almost like a little bag of water. Another real important part of the cell membrane are these proteins, and we'll just call them integral proteins, but they actually come in two different important varieties. One are these transmembrane proteins, which actually go ahead and stick all the way through that lipid bilayer. And they're going to be important in helping transport substances across the membrane. And we're going to talk a lot about that in the next section, but for now, just know that they're involved with transport. We've got other proteins that are, well, they're stuck within that lipid bilayer, but they don't go all the way through. And they're used for various things. They help control the shape of the cell membrane. They tend to be used for recognizing certain substances or communicating with other cells, communication within the cell. We'll talk a little bit about those later as well. Some other very important components of the cell membrane are this, well, you'll see them in these little yellow things over here, right? Those are cholesterol compounds, and they're kind of lipids, and we're going to see that the lipid bilayer needs to have something to help bind it together and keep it intact, because it's not quite as solid as you might think. In addition, you've got these little side chains that kind of sort of hang out towards the outer end of the cell. Some of them are attached to proteins, and some of them are just kind of sort of attached to the phospholipid layer. These are various elements of what are called the glycocalyx. We talked last time in a previous unit about saccharides, monosaccharides versus polysaccharides. Well, these are definitely polysaccharides. And they can be, like I say, attached to proteins, glycoproteins, or just attached to the lipid layer, glycolipids. Either way, they can be used for a number of different purposes. Cell recognition, communication. They can be used for attachment and like sticking the cell to other cells, kind of adhesive things. We're not going to deal too much with the glycocalyx, but you should know that it exists. All right, we hinted before that phospholipid layer doesn't behave so much as a solid as we might think. So this leads us to this idea of a fluid mosaic model of cells. Fluid because the phospholipid molecules, right, these puppies, tend to kind of sort of shift back and forth amongst themselves, sometimes letting material in or out of the cell. And we'll talk about which types of molecules can get in and out this way a little bit later. Mosaic because you've got the proteins, these transmembranal and peripheral proteins kind of stuck in the layer like little tiles of a mosaic art form. All right, so if we look at the main function of the cell membrane then, well, there's two things. One, yeah, it helps maintain the cell shape and contains what's inside and keeps what's outside, but it also controls what goes in and out of a cell. And that's extremely important. Now, we're going to spend a lot of time looking at how stuff gets in and how stuff gets out. But that leads me to something else here. And because the cell controls, or the cell membrane controls what gets in and out, it also controls the size of the cell. Now, imagine if we were going to go ahead and stick a person inside a cell. We'll call him Fred. There's Fred. Whoops. There he goes. Ugly Fred. Anyhow, if we want to feed Fred, we want to get nutrients to Fred, the only way is to actually send it through the membrane. So we're going to go ahead and take all these nutrients and we're going to go ahead and enter the membrane and go all the way through the cytoplasm. But by the time Fred gets his nutrients, he might have starved to death because that's a long distance to go. By the same token, guess what Fred's doing? In the cell, all alone, in the dark. Yep, you guessed it. He's releasing wastes. And all these wastes are going to build up and poison him unless he can get them all the way out in time before that happens. Either way, poor Fred's going to be in trouble. If, however, we put Fred inside one of these tiny cells, well, there's always an entry and exit point right there next to him. So the smaller the cell, the easier it is to get stuff into and out fast enough. Hence, most cells are actually really, really tiny as opposed to really, really large. Yeah, you guessed it. You're going to eventually have to go ahead and take a quiz on all this stuff. So, yeah, here's your practice quiz. Are you able to go ahead and answer these questions? Go ahead and prove it by doing it on a separate piece of paper, turning it in so that I can give you lots and lots of points so you can go ahead and pass this class, and also so you can go ahead and do this on the quiz when you actually take it in class. Anyway, if you have to go ahead and play this again, find the answers, or use the GC to find the answers from your notes, either way, go for it, but make sure you can do it.